I'm here to talk about a bill that is a matter of fundamental fairness to our veterans, most especially to our combat injured veterans, a group that should evoke the sympathies and support of our nation as no other. I'm here to talk about the Major Richard Starr Act. Many of my colleagues know about it because 76 members of this body are co-sponsors. That's a large number, but so far it has not been sufficient to gain even a vote. And so I'm asking today that that support be turned into action. This bipartisan legislation will correct one of the deepest injustices impacting disabled veterans. It's labeled by stakeholders as the Wounded Veterans Tax. Let me repeat, the Wounded Veterans Tax, as it stands now, prevents more than 50,000 combat-injured veterans who were forced to retire to be barred from a full military pension they earned or were promised. Let me explain. They are getting a dollar-for-dollar reduction of their military retirement pay from their VA disability benefits. The reduction dollar for dollar in their retirement pay is the result of their receiving those disability benefits for their combat injuries. And they are entitled to each of these separate and distinct and different forms of earned compensation. They've earned both. They are different, separate, and distinct. But right now, under current law, they're deprived of the full benefits of their pension because they were injured in combat. Just to describe this injustice should make our stomachs turn with outrage. The Major Richard Starr Act is really a common sense bill. We use that word common sense all the time in this chamber, but in this instance, it seems particularly appropriate. It would right this long-standing injustice and finally provide these military retirees their full VA disability and Defense Department retirement benefits. This cause is not only common sense, it's rightfully bipartisan. It has received overwhelming support, those 76 co-sponsors in this body, but also 304 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives. And it is the collectively top priority of the military and veterans services organization communities of the United States. And yet, year after year, this bill has stalled, and detractors have worked to deny a simple vote. Now, in public, critics have avoided taking a public position on the bill, and they have given lip service to veterans and advocates requesting their support. What their real reasons are, I can't say. But the fact of the matter is that these veterans have been denied this simple justice. And let me speak to those critics. We can't balance the federal budget on the backs of combat-injured retirees. Doing so reneges our obligation. It's a sacred obligation to take care of veterans after their time in uniform. The bill doesn't create some great new, overly generous benefit, but it would be enormously impactful and beneficial for each of those retirees who would be affected. The average is about $1,200 a month. Some more, maybe some a little bit less. $1,200 a month, you can do the math. It's not a fortune, but it would make a difference in the lives of these combat injured veterans. It simply ensures that the benefits we promised and the benefits they've earned are the benefits that are now delivered. It's that simple, not clawed back, as happens now, from the heroes who have sustained those combat-related injuries. The veterans and heroes involved in these bills are similar to the namesake of the bill, Major Richard Starr, a decorated war veteran and engineering officer in the Army. He suffered from lung cancer caused by burn pit exposure. We all know about Iraq and Afghanistan burn pit exposure. We passed the PAC Act to provide care and benefits for victims of those burn pits and exposure to other toxic chemicals. They led to his retirement and his death in 2021. He was 51 years old. Until his death, he was a dedicated advocate for his fellow veterans and combat-related disabilities. His wife, Tonya Starr, walked these halls by his side. She died in 2024. She called my staff days before her passing in tears because another Congress had ended 2024 without a vote on the Richard Starr Act. Tonya knew the tremendous difference this legislation would make in the lives of caregivers and widows like her. It would make a difference also in the lives of veterans like Pat Murray of North Kingston, Rhode Island. Pat is a Marine Corps veteran and a staunch veterans advocate. He recently welcomed a baby boy, and he was forced to move back to Rhode Island to be closer to his family because the injuries he sustained from an IED blast in Iraq made it difficult to care for the newborn. We need to be very clear. This act won't return his amputated leg, but it can provide him and his family with desperately needed financial certainty, which they deserve, they need, they were promised. And will also help veterans like retired Master Sergeant Gabriel Peterson of Biloxi, Mississippi. He was medically discharged as a result of reactive airway disease. He's on 5 different drugs. They help with his breathing. It's a struggle for him to live. And this act would ensure that he can provide for his family even if he's no longer able to be employed. The stories are powerful, and they are persuasive. They depict the scope and impact of this act, if it were passed, in life-saving and life-enhancing benefits, and what it will mean to the tens of thousands of veterans across this great nation. In fact, these veterans and their families, think of their families, deserve a lot better. They deserve elected officials who will stand up and deliver for them the benefits they were promised, the benefits they earned, and they need them and deserve them today. I'm asking my colleagues to advance this legislation now. The principle of taking care of our veterans has never been Democrat or Republican. The Veterans Affairs Committee is supremely bipartisan. My hope is that that tradition will continue, including today. So let's put politics aside, let's put partisan differences aside, finally do the right thing, and advance this important legislation for our nation's veterans. And so, notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Armed Services be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-1032, the Major Richard Starr Act, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President,
the senator from Mississippi.
Right to object.
let me say that I have deep respect for my colleague and friend, the senior senator from Connecticut. He's a veteran. I'm a veteran. I have no doubt in my mind that Senator Blumenthal has a heart for the veterans and for disabled veterans, and I appreciate that. He's moved with concern for those who have served and who have been injured. However, my colleague is asking for an entitlement that does amount to a double benefit and that we cannot afford. We're talking between $9 billion and $10 billion on the Department of Defense Authorization Act. And we're talking about adding a bill, a piece of legislation that really belongs in another jurisdiction, as my friend acknowledged. We cannot possibly add another $10 billion, $9 or $10 billion, to this of entitlement money to this DOD Authorization Act and hope to pass it. And that's a reason that in Democrat majorities and Republican majorities, House Democrat majorities and Senate Democrat majorities, and in Democratic administrations, this legislation has never been accepted because we simply cannot afford it. Historically, Congress has provided permanent new benefits only after we have identified an offset, savings of a similar amount. There's no such offset identified in this unanimous consent request. And when we do not identify offsets, then that $10 billion, almost $10 billion, has to come out of readiness, out of the strength of our military to defend ourselves in the most dangerous time we've had since World War II. So I have the deepest respect for my friend from Connecticut, and I admire his intentions. But until Congress, until authors of this proposal identify a way to offset the expense or to make it less expensive, we should not move forward with this legislation. Therefore, I do object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President,
The senator from Connecticut.
I want to respond just very briefly to my colleague from Mississippi and my friend, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. We work together, as he does always, in a bipartisan way on armed services issues. So what I'm about to say is not personal to him. In fact, I'm willing to bet that it isn't his decision to object here. But I want to refute 2 points. Number one, on double dipping, let's be clear that these are 2 separate programs, and the right to payment under each of them is separately deserved. Not everyone who is entitled to retirement pay gets disability benefits. You have to be in that club that nobody wants to join, of being combat injured. And it is a separate form of right that in no way involves double dipping, as we commonly refer to it. The retirement pay is for years of service in the military. VA disability compensation is for the loss of future earnings due to service-connected injuries or illnesses. And I just want to make clear this point is about really equity and fairness. Congress eliminated this offset for nearly 1 million veterans who have served 20 years and have a 50% VA disability rating or higher. It's already dealt with one segment of this group. This unjust assessment ultimately ought to be eliminated for all the 430,000 veterans who have their military retirement pay clawed back because they are receiving VA disability benefits. But we're starting here, or taking the next step, with 50,000 of those 430,000 who, in fairness, should receive both the retirement pay and disability benefits. And we're doing it because these 50,000 have combat-related injuries. And as to the total cost, again, not personal to my colleague from Mississippi, but the CBO told us that the Republican-supported tax cuts exploded the deficit by about $3.4 trillion. Let me repeat that, $3.4 trillion in large part tax cuts to people who didn't need them. These veterans need these benefits. This cost is a minuscule fraction of those trillions. This country can afford to do right by these combat-injured veterans. The DoD Office of the Actuary has indicated it could implement the Richards-Starr Act in a, quote, actuarially sound manner. It's not too costly. It's financially sound. I regret that the Richards-Starr Act will not be passed today, but I have another measure that I would like to bring to the floor, and it's with regret that we are not providing unanimous consent to the bill itself. And I understand the points made by my colleague, but I would like to present a middle ground. Since we don't have unanimous consent to the Major Richards-Starr Act today, let's agree to a vote. Let's have a time agreement that would authorize the Senate to take a single up and down vote on passage of this bill before the end of the year. This time agreement doesn't guarantee passage. It simply guarantees a vote. One vote. That's all I'm asking. Give us a vote on passage of the Major Richards-Starr bill, and it would be passage by a 60-vote margin, filibuster-proof. If we get 60 votes, the bill passes. If not, it goes down. Let's do it before the end of the year. I happen to think that we ought to spend whatever time is necessary on this bill. But I understand that leadership is concerned about time, and so my proposal strips away all the time-consuming procedural stuff. I have another word for it, but it allows us to go forward expeditiously, one vote scheduled entirely at Majority Leader Thune's discretion before the end of the year. It could start and finish in half an hour or 45 minutes. Surely the Republican leadership can spare that short time scheduled at their discretion to give these combat-injured veterans a single vote on this bill before the end of the year. And so, notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that at a time to be determined by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Democratic leader, but no later than December 31, 2025, the Committee on Armed Services be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-1032. Further, that there be up to 2 hours of debate on the bill, equally divided between the two leaders or their designees, and that upon the use or yielding back of that time, the bill can be considered read a third time and the Senate vote on passage of the bill with 60 affirmative votes required for passage, and all without further intervening action or debate, and no amendments or motion in order to the bill prior to the vote on passage.
Is there an objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Mississippi.
Mr. President, every time my Democratic friends want to advocate for another expensive program, they mention the tax cuts. Let me just stray from the issue at hand to say, as I've always said, when Republicans cut taxes on job creators, on small business people, on 95% of the people who filed a tax return back in 2017, jobs were created. And until the pandemic was visited upon the whole world, jobs were created and revenue rose for the United States of America. I have to say that. Let me also say this. There have been times very recently when the Democratic Party controlled the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the United States Senate. And even in those situations, those recent situations, this legislation costing in excess of $9 billion in mandatory spending was not brought forward. Now, why would our friends across the aisle and the President of the United States, who was a Democrat, not advocate for that and make sure it comes to a vote? Is that we've got to make choices when it comes to national defense. Where would we take the money, the $9 billion? Are we going to take it out of salary increases for our junior enlisted people, which is in this bill? Are we going to take it out of munitions? Are we going to take it out of modernization of our nuclear strategic system, which is behind and which needs it so desperately? We can't just print up another $9 or $10 billion for this purpose, particularly where there is the question that has not been answered about double compensation here. And so I would just say it's easy to point fingers at this side of the aisle on this occasion and on this unanimous consent request, but there's a reason that there has been a bipartisan reluctance to spend this extra money, which we'd love to have if we had it, if we could just wave a magic wand and create the money out of thin air, but we cannot do it. The responsible thing, regardless of who's been in charge of this chamber, Mr. President, has been to do the best we can for our veterans with one or the other of these compensation programs. And so for that reason, I do object.
Mr. President?
The objection is heard. The senator from Connecticut.
I respect the points that are being made by my friend from Mississippi. In fact, we share support for every one of those armed services measures that he has described, whether it is bolstering our nuclear force, providing for more drone protection, increasing well-deserved compensation for our military men and women, and it is the reason why he has led and I have supported the current National Defense Authorization Act that hopefully will be approved by this body within days. Where we differ is, I think, that I believe that the $9 or $10 billion that would go to assure fundamental fairness to our military is there, or a great nation should assure it is there. When we're talking about the trillions that we will spend on many other things, some of them very worthwhile, but in my view, none more worthwhile than doing right by these veterans. It isn't double dipping. It isn't overly generous. It isn't going to break the bank, so to speak. To the federal government as a whole, with its trillions of dollars, it is a minuscule fraction. To those veterans, it's not only a matter of quality of life and sometimes survival, it's fundamental fairness. They were promised. They've earned it. They deserve it. They need it. They ought to have it. And this measure simply would assure a vote. A vote. We ought to face our responsibilities. Maybe my colleagues, even though 76 of them have co-sponsored, that's 3/4 of this body, maybe it would still fail for whatever reason. But I'd like to take my chances. And I assure my colleague from Mississippi, who I think supports the basic goal from what he has said, that I will continue fighting and working for this measure to pass. I know there is deep and broad support in this body for it. And I look forward to a time when he and I will be on the floor together, both of us supporting this measure in a vote. I'm not giving up. And I am very hopeful that this cause will continue to be bipartisan. Thank you, Mr. President.